פרק מ'. English. This is in English. יש לי גם בעברית, אבל זה בזמנים אחרים. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Today we're going to do things in a very different way. Usually we analyze the text, but here's the challenge. The challenge is that chapters 40, 41, and 42 are extremely detailed, and to be honest, extremely boring. It's all about structure, about measurements, about details, architecture, interior design. Yeah, I know, but this is, so what I would like to do is the following. We're going to look at those three chapters as one unit. We're going to not even go into the text itself so much, except for a pasuk here or there. We're going to kind of like describe very, very generally, in very general way, what we have there. And what I would like to focus is the more interesting stuff about the third temple. Okay? Because that is our subject. The page, okay, 316. Okay, so let's just put the framework for the thing. According to our tradition, Jewish tradition, the third temple is the one that's going to be built in Har HaBayit, in Temple Mount, in the future. The foundation for that, the idea, the nucleus of this idea, as we said it many times, is our book Sefer Yechezkel, and it's somewhat complemented also by the prophecy of others. Okay, one of the things that is unique to the third temple, especially the way it's depicted from the book of Yechezkel, is the shape. Extremely detailed measurements, shape, the ornaments, design, all that kind of stuff. We can see that it's kind of like the general idea is parallel, similar to the previous temples. You know, it talks about Kodesh HaKodashim, Hechal, Azara, those sections. However, there's tremendous difference the way Yechezkel described it and the way we know it from the temple that Shlomo HaMelech built, or the one that was built later on, meaning the second temple. Okay, correct, we do, of course, we have those. Compare, correct, absolutely. Now, one of the biggest problems that all the commentators and all those who try to understand how it's going to look like and what all that stuff, like based on book of Yechezkel, is the inability or the difficulty, the challenge to understand certain verses for technical details that we do not know what they mean. Now, interestingly, according to the Rambam, this inability to understand into details what Yechezkel is talking about, that is the reason why the second temple was built in a different way than what it is described. If you remember, we said that there's a view that says, oh, the second temple was not built according to the description in Sefer Yechezkel, and therefore it's going to be a third temple. The Rambam disagrees with that. The Rambam says, no, it's not necessarily. He said they didn't know how to interpret what's written here, and because of that, they ended up with a building that looked different. Okay? That's number one. The Malbim disagrees with the Rambam. The Malbim says they didn't know. They knew what it means. They understood the book of Yechezkel. That was not the issue. If you remember, Malachi, Haggai, those prophets were still alive. Okay, so you had prophets at the time, at least in the beginning of the building of the second temple. So he said, no. They deliberately didn't build it the way Yechezkel described it for one reason, spiritual. They realized that they're not on that spiritual level. Yechezkel description is connected to the complete redemption, to a very, very high spiritual state. And since the nation is not in that place, they made changes to the structure to kind of demonstrate that. And therefore, we ended up with a building that looked in a different way. Okay? Now, I want to make it a little bit more contemporary. So let's, for just a couple of seconds, then we're going to go into the kind of a little bit to understand in generally the description, and then I want to go into two different ideas that I think are interesting. Okay, according to some of the opinions, the third temple is going to come perfect, built from the heaven. Okay, it's based on one of the stories in the Talmud that says that it's going to be built very, very quickly and against the rules or the way we understand that. Okay, for example, Rashi, that's his approach. Yegale ve'avo mishamayim. It's going to come kind of like come from the heavens the way it is. Okay, that's okay. And that means it's not going to be built by people. Contrary to that approach is the Rambam. The Rambam says that's absolutely not true. The Rambam says it's going to be built by people, and that's it. They'll figure out what to do. They'll interpret the text the way it should be, and they're going to build it. There's nothing miraculous about that. And there's another approach, the middle approach, that says certain parts are going to come from above, from the heavens, and certain parts are going to be built by us. Okay, so these are kind of like summarizing the three different approaches. Now, fast forward, because like Second Temple was destroyed, we went to exile for 2,000 years. Okay, we had no access to Temple Mount until 1967. Okay, so now we're immediately after the Six-Day War, 1967. Different groups decided that it's time to start the process of building the third temple. Most famous are Ne'emanei Harabait and Machon HaMikdash, two movements that still exist today, very active. Definitely Machon HaMikdash, if you go to Yerushalayim, they have a building, they have a phenomenal website also. They rebuilt a lot of the vessels, a lot of the things that are supposed to be in the temple, gold, silver, whatever, copper, the menorah, the shulchan, all that kind of stuff. They built it. They claim it's a model. Okay, but okay, fine. And what they do is mainly educational activity. They try to teach and to explain and to basically promote how come this is so important. What's interesting to note is that all this debate, whether we should deal with that stuff or not, all that kind of stuff, is based on a fundamental difference, a dispute, halachic dispute, a machloket, whether we should do that or not. Okay, so there's one approach that says absolutely not. It's something is a part of a bigger process, a process of redemption. We're not there. We're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to, if not, the whole thing is going to come perfect and ready from the heavens. At least there's going to be some sort of a preliminary stages that's supposed to tell us that we are approaching that state. We're not there. Forget about the whole thing. A different approach is no. We have to be active. We have to start the process itself, and it becomes extremely. It's a huge explosive politically. Why? Because that is connected to Dome of the Rock. Right? According to tradition, this is where Dome of the Rock is located. So that means if we are
for the Medina, it's the same for the Medina, the same machloket.
Yeah. So the idea is, if the temple is going to be built, obviously that mosque has to be removed somehow. And that creates, of course, a huge, political nucleus bomb. And yeah, which basically, perhaps even the nucleus of the Israeli-Arab dispute for not only now, forever. Okay. One of the issues that we're dealing with, and this is one of the hot topics today, is also whether we're allowed to go there even to Har HaBayit. And if you watch the news, and this is not that simple, and this is also a very, very hot topic. And again, you have one approach actually accepted by the chief rabbinate of Israel, that we should not go there for halachic reasons. Others disagree, and many, many, many people. It's actually a tremendously growing trend to go to Har HaBayit and visit there. Interestingly, in a poll, research that was done, a questionnaire in 2009, and this is, by the way, now much more than back then. It was already 64 of Israelis believe that we should build or start preparing or whatever the third temple. 64 Israelis in 2009. Today, it's probably somewhere around 80%. Okay, fine. I want to go into the text itself, now that we kind of framed that, and very quickly deal with that. Actually, we're not going to read a lot of text. We're going to skip most of that, but, pasuk here and there. So as I said, chapters 40, Mem, through the end of the book, 48, Mem Chet, is the unit that completes the book. We have to figure out what we're doing after that. If anyone has any suggestions, talk to me, please. I'm thinking, obviously something that is easier. Well, we do that in Hebrew. Okay, maybe we'll do it in English as well. I don't know. Okay, maybe. It's not a bad idea. Okay, so that unit is completing the book, describing the temple, Jerusalem, Israel in the Messianic time, in the future. And within that unit, we have subdivision. The first one is chapters 40, 41, and 42, dealing with the temple itself, the gates, the courtyards, and the other structures that are around. Now, Those chapters, those 3 chapters, are extremely difficult to understand, both because we have words that we don't know exactly what they mean and terms that we don't really understand. And therefore, there's kind of like not a clear picture how it's supposed to look like, all the details. Now, all the commentaries are dealing with that. And I want to tell you, I'm going to quote 2. Rabbi Yosef Kara wrote very simply, Nishlam Perush Sefer Yechezkel. He finishes his commentary on the book of Ezekiel at the end of chapter 39. That's it. He said, like, the rest of that, I'm not dealing with that. It's impossible to interpret that. I'm not going to do that. Rabbi Yeshaya Deterani, for example, write the following: Midot habayit v'seder hakorbanot mishpat hakohanim ha'amurim kan, measurements of the house and the order of the sacrifices and the role of the kohanim, en adam ba'olam sheyuchal la'amod ala mitatam. There's not even one person in the world that can fully understand what it means. The Rambam himself wrote the following: V'chen binyan ha'atid lehibanot. We do believe that bayit, that temple, is going to be built in the future. Af al pi shehu katuv beYechezkel, based on what is written in Yechezkel, eino meforash umevoar. However, it is cannot be interpreted, cannot be explained. Okay, so that's one approach. Alongside that approach, we have later opinions, commentaries that dealt with that, try to explain according to their understanding, how it's supposed to be, what is it supposed to be. Maybe at some point I can bring some pictures that kind of demonstrate according to those different opinions, like how it's going to look like and that kind of stuff. But there's no doubt everybody agreed that some of the terms, some of the words, some of the things that are written, just nobody really understands what it means. Okay. The beginning is Yechezkel has a vision. In that vision, he is brought to Eretz Israel. He is brought to a high mountain that represents the place of the temple. In the south of the mountain, he sees a city. He's going to stand there in the southern part later on. But in the meantime, he meets a character, and that character holds some sort of a measuring tool. And the job of that character is to show Yechezkel the structure of the house, of the temple. From the very beginning, we understand that we're going to deal with extremely detailed description of the house, measurements, areas, parameters, all that kind of stuff. And the idea is to demonstrate, and all those details is to demonstrate that indeed this is something realistic. This is something that is going to happen. It's not some sort of a vague prophecy that we are not sure what about it and all that kind of stuff. Okay? Because as you know, the more details you give into something, the more, it becomes more real. Okay. Then it goes into the description. It starts from the outside and goes inwards. There's a wall, and the wall surrounds the perimeter of the temple, all the sides. Okay? Then it goes into the gates. It describes the gates. There are 3 gates in the wall, and he describes the wall, describes the gates, and gives the measurements of all that stuff, and it's extremely, extremely detailed. You'll thank me later when you read all that stuff, if you want to read that stuff, that I'm summarizing that without getting into all the details. Okay, then after, and he is going through the eastern gate, and he goes into the outer courtyard. So we have a wall, 3 gates in the wall. In the vision, he goes through the eastern gate into the outer courtyard of the temple. Here, there are 30 chambers. We're not sure exactly what's the functionality of those chambers, but based on what we learned from the first temple and the second temple, we can assume use them as like offices, whatever, for the different needs of the temple. I'm sorry, classes, maybe, you know. There was like a lot of, for example, first of all, there was a lot of teaching, so it makes sense, but there was also a lot of collecting money, and there was like all sorts of stuff, and people who were working with the administration and all that kind of stuff. So that's probably what those chambers were used to. Okay, then he goes and he describes the other gates, which have, those gates have an identical structure or identical form to the eastern gate. Okay, so he started with the northern one, then he goes into the southern gate. So then after he completes his description of the outer courtyard, he's going to go into the inner courtyard. Okay, and he's going to the inner courtyard using the southern gate. Okay, then he describes the other gates. There's this northern gate and the eastern gate. Okay, fine. What's interesting is that later on we're going to see a bunch of halachot in the future temple that Yechezkel takes a much more strict approach than what the Torah describes, especially in the book of Vayikra. Right? So, for example, we have, I'm just going to give one example, okay? The Torah talks about when the korbanot, when the sacrifices are being brought, okay? So after the slaughtering of the animal, certain part, you wash them. Okay, you wash the meat. Okay, that's the Torah. Yechezkel talks about, for example, another washing, that they need to wash the animal before slaughtering also. Okay, the Torah doesn't talk about that. So we see there are a bunch of examples. We're gonna try to understand what is going on here when we get to that. That's in the, not today, of that tendency of Yechezkel is more machmir. You know, he's taking an approach that is more strict than what is described in the Torah. Okay, now, so he is in the courtyard, then he goes in, and he is in the hall, ulam. He's in the hall. In the hall, there are 4 tables, 2 on each side, and another 8 that we call el kitfei hashar, meaning inside a hall, kind of like closer to the yard. Total of 8 tables. Those tables are used to sacrifice, to specifically slaughtering. Okay, then using the northern gate, he goes into the inner courtyard, and over there he sees those chambers that's supposed to be like some of the offices for the Kohanim and those who are serving in the Kodesh. Fine. The group of Kohanim that was chosen to do all the work is Bnei Tzadok, family of Tzadok. And there's a description, there's an explanation why. So if we go back to the Torah times, we know that the Kohanim are the ones, all the Kohanim, and actually we have the descriptions of what happened. Even in terms of the second temple, the Mishnah is full of those descriptions that they used to take turns, different families, they had different times of the year, okay, all that kind of stuff. Yechezkel is taking a different approach. And he says, there's only one family, I mean, I guess it's a huge family, that is going to be, that was chosen to serve and to do all that work, is the family of Tzadok. Why? שמרו את משמרת מקדשי בתעות בני ישראל מעליי. המה יקרבו אליי לשרתני ועמדו להקריב לי חיל לבדם נאום אדוני אלוהים. They did not sin, they did not, that particular branch, they did not sin, they did not fail. Correct. And therefore, they are to be the ones to serve in the Kodesh, do all the rituals. Question. What's going to happen with the rest of them, the rest of the Kohanim? So they call them Shomrei Mishmeret HaMizbeach, meaning they're going to be equal to the rest of Shevet Levi, i.e. the Levim. Interesting. If you remember, in the desert, there was a split in the tribe of Levi. Aharon and his sons became the Kohanim, and that means only that branch of the family continued to be Kohanim. Everybody else, like Moshe and their cousins, Uziel, Yitzhafan, Korach, all those, no, they're Levim. And there was a clear distinction of what the Kohanim are doing in the temple, what the Levim are doing. Here comes Yechezkel and he says, even from all the Kohanim, no, only one branch, the family, just a second, Shoshana, the family of Tzadok, that branch of the family, they will continue to serve and do all those rituals. Everybody else, all the rest of the Kohanim are going to be equal to the Levim. Yes, Shoshana. Okay, you're muted, so I can't hear you.
My question is, in what generation was the Kohen Tzadok?
It's a good question. The problem is
where were the Hashmonaim? Which family was the Hashmonaim?
I don't know. But the point is that Tzadok is a kind of a name that comes several times throughout Jewish history in the families.
Usually it's not a good one.
No. So we don't know really.
Yeah.
Okay. So those rest of the Kohanim are going to join the Levim, for example, in the singing and the music. This is making a mental note of that, because music is a big deal, and we're going to talk about that hopefully today, later. But the family of Tzadok is going to do that. That's basically chapter 40. Chapter 41. After his examination and the way he sees the courtyards, Yechezkel goes into the temple itself. Now, I'm going to remind you that there are two parts in the temple, what we call the Kodesh. The Kodesh had the table, the Shulchan, the menorah, the lamp, and the Mizbeach HaKtoret, and the altar of the incense. Okay? And then you had the Kodesh HaKodashim, the other part where you had the Aron, and where the Kohen Gadol, only the high priest, used to go in once a year on Yom Kippur. Now, in the temple that Yechezkel see in his prophecy, there are three parts: the Ulam, Heichal, and Kodesh HaKodashim. These are the three parts. The inner part, which is the most important, is Kodesh HaKodashim, which is interesting. Use the term that was used in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, in the desert, i.e. Kodesh HaKodashim. When Shlomo HaMelech builds the temple, he doesn't use that term Kodesh HaKodeshim, but rather he calls it Devir. Okay? Now, in the last verses of chapter 40, we said that Yechezkel gets into the hall, to the Ulam. But from there, so he goes to the Ulam and he continues into the Heichal. And from the Heichal, he continues into Kodesh HaKodeshim. So these are the three parts. Now, unlike when he approaches the Ulam and the Heichal, the word over there that is used is Vayevi'eni. Okay, and he brought me, meaning the Spirit, God, whatever, the vision, in the vision, I was brought. Here, when he talks about Kodesh HaKodeshim, it says Uva, came, meaning from that we understand that Yechezkel, even in the vision, was not allowed inside Kodesh HaKodeshim. Even in the vision, he was not allowed to enter. Even if it's a kind of think about it as a 3D movie, right? That's basically what he is experiencing, right? So he can't go into Kodesh HaKodeshim. And he's kind of watching Kodesh HaKodeshim from the outside. Okay. The rest of the book, the rest of the thing is extreme details about all the structure and all the floors and what kind of material and how it's done. And okay. Then he describes the house itself, the temple itself, and its surrounding. I mean, he did that, right? The house itself and the surrounding. Then he goes into the inner design of the different structures. And he talks about sipim, chalonot, the windows, atikim. We don't know exactly what it means. What's interesting is that he talks about some sort of an ornament or some sort of a design that happens there of kruvim and timurim. Kruvim, the cherubs, we know that. We're going to talk about it in a second. And timurim. Timurim comes from the word tamar. Okay, that means it's the shape of a palm tree. Correct. Right, so you have the columns and you have this design of the kruvim and the timurim, those palm tree, okay? Okay, so we know that it's all covered with wood. The windows, everything from the inside, from the floor goes all the way to the top of the windows. Everything is covered with wood. Now, on the wood, you have the design of the kruvim and the timurim. And it's kind of a pattern. Now, each kruv has two faces. A face of a man, of a face of a lion. And they facing away from each other. So it means that in every part of the design, you have either a face of a man or a face of, okay, it's a face of a man facing a palm tree. And then from the other side, you have a face of a lion facing a palm tree. Okay? Now, it's something that is not completely new. We know of this idea of kruvim and from the first temple, but the direction where they're facing, this is very interesting idea. So question number one, what's the significance of that palm tree? That's number one. Okay, so it's okay, but you're saying basically it's an ornament. It's basically a design, perhaps to remind us the time of the of the desert and stuff like that. But basically, you're saying it's a design.
The first kruvim.
Wait, I'm not talking about the kruvim yet. Hold on.
The first kruvim were only one face.
I get it. I'm not talking about the kruvim that on the kaporet, right? Just a sec. Now, but in the first temple, we have a description of the Kruvim. And it says over there, Ufnehem ish el achiv, el hakaporet yu pnei hakruvim. That's in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle that Moses built. The Kruvim are facing each other. According to Midrashim, we mentioned that many times. What are the faces of the Kruvim? Remember? A boy and a girl. And they're facing each other. That's in the Mishkan. Fast forward. In the Mikdash, it says what? Vehem omdim al raglehem ufnehem labayit. They stand and they are looking not at each other, the Kruvim, but rather at the house, at the room, at the structure. Okay, fine. What was the functionality of the Mishkan? What it was used to? Remember, in the beginning it was called Ohel Moed. Before it was built even, before in the beginning it was just a tent. Then, okay, but let's be not in a metaphor, like, you know, again, that's a nice metaphor, but functionality, what was going there? God was talking to Moshe. That was the place where God is talking to us, talking to Moshe. Moshe is delivering the message. That's the direction. From him to us. What about the temple? The first temple, second temple, the same thing. It's the other direction. We talk to God. I get it. I understand. I agree with you. But the point is, this is very significant. In the Mishkan, God is talking to us. In the Mikdash, we are talking to God. Okay? And that's exactly what Shlomo HaMelech says. להיות עיניך פתוחות אל הבית הזה, לילה ויום אל המקום אשר אמרת, יהיה שמי שם לשמוע אל התפילה. God says, I'm going to be there to listen to your prayers. ושמעת, or in different places it says, ושמעת, there's a famous pasuk, אל תחינת עבדך ועמך ישראל אשר יתפללו אל המקום הזה, שלמה המלך says, in Melachim. And you will, his prayer is that you, God, will hear the prayers in this place. So this is very significant. In the Mishkan, God is talking to us. In the temple, we are talking to God. Remember last week we talked about this idea of our relationship with God is like children, like, you know, they mature. In the beginning, when you have a little baby, you talk all the time as the parent. Later on, they talk, you listen, especially if you have teenagers. Trust me, I know. Okay. So in both cases, the Kruvim are facing the speaker. In the Mishkan, they face each other. Why? Because they're facing the kaporet. The kaporet is that kind of curtain that is above the ark. This is where the speaker was, right? That's the speakers were over there. This is where God spoke from. So therefore, they're facing, right? In the temple, it's the opposite. They're facing the outside, us, the people who came to pray. Okay. Now, if that's the case, what is the significance of those palm trees? The palm trees represent the people who came to pray. Why am I saying that? Who are the people who come? What is the image that King David is using already for the people who are going to come and pray in the temple? Tzaddik katamar yifrach. Right? we are compared to palm trees. שתולים בבית אדוני בחצרות אלוהינו יפריחו. Okay, so now we understand that. Now, yes. The idea is everyone who comes to the temple is considered to be a tzaddik. That's the whole point. I want to digress for a second. One of the things that, one of remarks that I received 20-something years ago from somebody, a rabbi that I see as a mentor, very much shaped my approach. Before I came here, I was in Connecticut. I was there for a very, very, very lovely community. I think up until today, I think it's one of the only places, Orthodox places, where the parking lot is open on Shabbat. And a significant percentage of the people come to the synagogue driving, parking in the parking lot. And it's something that used to be more popular in the 50s, 60s, less in recent years. But nonetheless, that place is still, that is the practice. And I remember talking to the Rabbi Emeritus about that. Look, yeah, I came from Israel. For me, it was like kind of weird. Israelis are not very tolerant, and even like used to that stuff. And he says to me, here's the approach that I adopt. Whatever people do, they do. I don't care. Once they enter the walls of the synagogue, once they enter the synagogue, I need to consider them as a complete Baal Tshuva. Everyone is a Baal Tshuva, has the potential of being Baal Tshuva from that moment. So, looking at that rationally, are they going to go back to their car after services? Yes. But I don't care, he says, about that. Because maybe not. We need to leave that world of rationalism and look at people. As soon as they walk in, they have that potential. So everyone is a tzaddik. And therefore, we do not distinguish between people who drive or not, and do that and not. It's nobody's business. And it's between them and God. That's it. And that made a tremendous impression on me. And that's the way I live my life. And that's the way I practice also as a rabbi and the chazan. So it goes to your comment. When people come to the temple, a lot of people came because what? They had to bring sin offerings. So they are sinners. Not only that, they came to that place because they're sinners. It's not even something that you need to prove. Nonetheless, they're called tzaddik. Why? Because they do tshuva. They recognize their fault, whatever that is. But I need, as an institution, I need to look at them as somebody who has the potential of doing complete tshuva immediately. Whether that's going to happen or not, it's between them and God. Not my business. Of course. Not only that, we had special sacrifice. We had a special. No. It's nothing to do with that. No. There's nothing to do with that. No. I want to be very clear. There's one thing that is called the laws of Shabbat. It has nothing to do with the sacrifices. The sacrifices were the rituals. Don't get confused between the two. Okay. The rituals, i.e., the sacrifices that took place in the temple, today are represented by our tefillot. Right? For example, we have a Musaf service. That's because there was a Musaf sacrifice. Okay? We say it. Right? 2 lambs, 2 esronim, solet, all that kind of stuff. That was the sacrifice. That's the specifics of that sacrifice. So that sacrifice was brought on Shabbat. Today is Rosh Chodesh. There was an additional sacrifice of Rosh Chodesh. There was a burnt offering. There was, lambs, bulls, whatever, all that kind of stuff. That was specific, and that's what we do. And the holidays, and that's what we do in the Musaf service. We actually specify, we read those verses that describe what were those sacrifices. And the Kohanim brought those sacrifices. In addition, by the way, to the regular sacrifice, to the Tamid Shel Shachar and Tamid Shel Ben HaArbaim, which is Sacharit and Mincha. Right? The regular sacrifices. That's one thing. But the Torah comes with a bunch of laws, and later on, the rabbis derive from that bunch of other laws and expand on that, and this is a whole different class. But correct. But that entails around the idea of the laws of Shabbat. You can do this, you don't do this. Okay, you can argue about that. And some rabbis, you can say that you can do that, and some rabbis say, don't do that, whatever. That's a whole different story. But I'm talking about the principle. I'm talking about the mechanism. I'm talking about this idea. Okay, so Shabbat is the day where God stopped working. I'm making it very, very simple. Therefore, we are commanded to do the same thing. We cannot do any creative work. What's creative work? It's a whole different discussion. But we can't, because we need to do what God did. God says you cannot do that stuff. So we cannot do that stuff. And that's it. In addition to that was all the rituals. And the rituals later on were replaced by our tefillot. Okay. Now, going back to this. The faces of those kruvim. The faces of those kruvim. It says we have a man's face, a human face, to be more exact, a human face and a lion face. If you remember, both in chapter 1 and chapter 10, we talked also about the kruvim. We spoke a lot about the kruvim. And we talked about 4 kruvim. Mm-hmm. We had human face, lion face, bull, and remember what was the 4th? Eagle.
It's very bizarre that they have animals in there. It immediately disturbs.
Because it's nature. You have humanity is one category. You have domesticated animals represented by the bull. You have the birds. And you have animal kingdom represented by the lion. That's one of the interpretations. Okay, anyway, but you have 4. Here, we're talking about 2. Now, what is the fundamental difference between the kruvim that we talked about in the Merkava, in that vehicle? Remember, chapter 1, that drone, as I described that, and the kruvim that we have in the temple. What's the kind of like fundamental difference? Okay, forget about the wings, but I'm saying like even, okay, so we had 4 versus 2, but the functionality here in the temple, okay, good. And what do they do in the temple? Okay, so in the temple, they represent the Shekhinah. They represent the divine presence. This is like where the divine presence, the Shekhinah, is going to be. However, the Merkava in complete, the opposite, is to carry the Shekhinah away. Remember Yechezkel's vision. He's describing the Shekhinah leaving Beit HaMikdash. This is before even the destruction of the temple, and going eventually to be with them in Bavel. Now we're talking about the end of days when the Shekhinah comes back. So it's the complete opposite. What's the functionality of those kruvim? The two kruvim in the temple represent the Shekhinah, where the Shekhinah dwells. The four kruvim in the Merkava represent the ability to carry the Shekhinah as it leaves Beit HaMikdash. This is why it has, the Merkava had four kruvim, because it was multi-directional. You can have it in any direction that it needs. The drone can fly in any direction. And what about the temple? The temple is going to be only two, and the two because the Shekhinah is going to be in the middle. Now, we said there were four in the Merkava, but here there are only two. So when you need to reduce from 4 to 2, like all the different categories, you end up with humanity and one representative from the animal kingdom, a lion. Okay. Now, another difference that we
Does
see.
it have to do with Yehuda?
What?
Does it have to do with Yehuda?
No, I don't think so.
Rather than
Maybe like, as a kind of like, metaphoric, whatever. But
it's Mashiach ben David. I'm sorry.
I don't know. I don't know if these are all kind of, I don't know. Okay, one more difference between the temple that Shlomo HaMelech built and what Yechezkel describes. In the temple, the first temple, the one that Shlomo built, the word Zahav, gold, is all over the place. 18 times in that description. Here, not even once. It seems that the temple, the future temple, is going to be much more modest, less flashy, bigger, but less flashy and fancy than the one that Shlomo built. As you remember, also Shlomo allowed himself to do all those stuff, and that brought to his falling eventually. The women, kesef v'zahav, specifically the Torah talks about this idea, the prohibition for the king to have a lot of gold. In the times of Shlomo, he flooded the whole kingdom with gold. And there's no doubt that that was another reason for his downfall. Okay, that brings us the next pasuk of Beth in chapter 41, talks about the Mizbeach, the altar. And this is one of the famous, it's a famous pasuk, not because of the pasuk itself, but because of the comments that the commentaries have made. The pasuk says, it starts with the word hamizbeach, the altar, and then at the end it says, "Vaydaber elai ze hashulchan asher lifnei Adonai." That's the table. And the rabbis already in the Talmud says, "Patach b'mizbeach v'siyem b'shulchan." I don't get it. Is this an altar or this is a table? You call it in the beginning, you call it altar, mizbeach, and then you say the same pasuk. You say that at the end, you call it a table, shulchan. So, option number one, maybe it is a mizbeach that sometimes is called table. I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about some sort of a rectangular shape thing that is, not very different from each other. So it's either a mizbeach that's sometimes called shulchan, or shulchan that's sometimes called mizbeach. And there's a tremendous machloket among the mefarshim on that. Okay, why am I mentioning that? From a symbolic point of view, the Mishkan is the house, whatever that means, the house of God in the desert, among the camp. If that's a house, well, it has those basic things, furniture that we find in a house. The Sforno says, אחר מעשה אהרון שהיה כדמות כיסא לשכינה, ציווה על שולחן ומנורה כמנהגם לפני השרים. In other words, the ark represents a chair, because this is where you rest, you sit on something. So the ark is where the Shekhinah rests. So that is the parallel for a chair. Think minimalistic, okay? Not what we have in our houses today. And then he says, Shulchan u'menorah. Shulchan, you need a table because you need somewhere to put your things, and you need to eat on something, and you need a table, and a menorah, a lamp, so you'll be able to see. That is the stuff that you will find in every house. Chair or a bed, whatever, something that, right? Fine. What about the mizbeach? Altar is not something that you'll find in a house. I hope so.
It's not inside the Kodesh Kodashim.
No, it's not. But it represented this is something special, something different. This is not any house. This is the house of Hashem. Now, what happens on that altar? This is not the altar where you bring the sacrifices. These are outside. This is inside. Mizbach HaKetoret. No, that's Lechem Apanim. That's the incense. I'm talking about the incense. That is the altar for the incense. Okay? Okay? Why this is crucial, and why is it there inside, in the inner part, before Kodesh HaKodashim? What happened when you burn stuff? Smell. But what else happens? Smoke. Thank you. The smoke represents what? Smoke looks like what? No. Cloud. It's not about, no, it's not about that. Yeah. The Torah says, Ki be'anan era'eh ala kaporet. God says, I'm going to be seen in a cloud above the kaporet, above the Aron. Okay, so if I'm in the desert and I'm out in nature, okay, so there's a cloud. God creates, so there's a cloud over there. However, if I'm inside a building, I'm not going to have a cloud inside. I need to manufacture that cloud. I need to create a cloud. How do I do that? I create smoke. Okay, so the Kohen Gadol, even the Kohen Gadol, when he goes into Kodesh HaKodashim, he's not allowed to see the exact place of the Shekhinah. He needs to create some sort of a screen. What is that? It's that smoke, a cloud. He needs to kind of, okay, which is the expression of the dwelling of the Shekhinah everywhere. And that was the functionality of the Mizbach HaKetoret. The altar of the incense, that was its functionality. It, in addition to the curtain, the parochet, right? So you had a parochet. Okay, if you have an ark over there, like you have visuals, then okay, we call it not parochet, but that's the curtain. But in addition to that, before that, there was some sort of a cloud, a smoke, kind of to create another. Okay, fine. And then, okay, apparently to the interesting stuff, we're not going to have chance to go to today, but we're going to finish this chapter. Then next week, we're going to do, I guess, chapter 42 and more interesting stuff. Okay, this is already 12. Fine. The description of the temple ends with the description of the doors. The doors. And with that, he completes his, tour, and he goes back into the courtyard, and that's like the end of that section. That's the end of also of chapter 41. Chapter 42, which we're going to do next week, he starts with the outer courtyard, and he sees those chambers and gives those it's actually, you know what? Let's 2 more minutes. He sees those chambers, and those, in chapter 42, and those descriptions, specifically verses Hey and Vav, Rashi says the following. Listen to this. ואני לא יכולתי להבין בשלושת המקראות הללו כלל, and I was not able to understand anything that he describes there. מהו כי יאכלו עתיקים, מה הם אותם עתיקים, והאח אוכלות מן העליונות ואינם אוכלות מן התחתונות ומן התיכונות. He said, I really have no idea. Rashi says, I have no idea what he is talking about. He said, לא ידעתי להבין בו. And listen to this. ואני לא היה לי לא רב ולא עוזר בכל הבניין הזה. And I couldn't ask anyone. My rabbis didn't teach me that. I have no one to ask. And I'm completely lost. This is Rashi. Radak says something similar. ואיני יכול להבין בניין הלשכות האלה, and I cannot understand those chambers, the structure of those chambers. איך ראה אותם הנביא, how he saw them, ובאיזה עניין היה, and what is the configuration of them. And he summarizes and says, Parasha zo atid Eliyahu leparsha. He said, this thing, Eliyahu Navi, Elijah, is going to come and tell us what's going on, because I don't know what's going on over there. So, if this is Rashi and Radak, we definitely cannot, But all we know is that there are chambers from north and south of the building, and aside those chambers, there's a wall, and they are built in some sort of a structure that we don't really know. What is that structure? And then this tour is completed with the measurement of the entire perimeter from east to west, 500 amot, and from north to south, 500 amot, which tells you it was a square. Okay, 500 amot by 500 amot, square structure. You had a wall that separates between the Kodesh and the Hol, between the holy and the profane. And what is significant is that at this point, with the description of the wall that separates the holy from the profane, now we understand that the conditions are right for the Shekhinah to return into the temple. And indeed, the next chapter, chapter 43, is going to describe the return of the Shekhinah, structure of the Mizbeach, and the inauguration of the Mizbeach. So it's kind of 3 chapters that are extremely detailed, that are the required conditions for the real thing. which means that the Shekhinah is going to return into the temple. Up until that point, it's just a building. It's just rooms. Okay? So we're going to continue next week. Next week, we're going to learn about a piece of history that the third temple was at some point in history was started to be built. And we're going to also learn about the approach in the 20th century of Rav Kook and Rav Hirschenson and Herzl, Theodor Herzl. I'm going to put all three of them together and how they saw this idea of building the third temple. That's going to happen next week. So next week, same time, same place, I think, unless something else happens. And that's it. Yes.
Thank you.